So, good afternoon. I'm Karen Rowland. I am the lead member for Culture, Heritage, and Recreation. And today I've brought along Carolyn, who is our park's landscape architect, to talk to us about how you can create a wildflower patch right in your very own back garden. So my first question, I think, is going to be to Carolyn. What would you actually want to do if you want to introduce wildflowers into your own back garden?
So if someone wanted to recreate what you've done here, they could go about it the way that you did, which was by laying wildflower turf, which is a really good way to do it because you get such good establishment and you can just see how successful your own garden has been. The other way to do it is much cheaper, by buying wildflower seed, but sometimes establishment is less guaranteed. So I imagine what you did here, I imagine, was that you stripped out all the vegetation that was here before because you don't want anything in the ground, no vegetation. The really important thing for wildflowers is poor soil, because if there's too much competition from the grass, which gets fed by nutrients, then it tends to compete out the wildflowers. So you strip all the vegetation out, which you do either by lifting it by hand, if you want to do it organically, or some people will spray it all off and then remove the sprayed area. And then you rake it all. You don't want to dig too deep because then you get deep soils. And it's one tip to remember: if you want something to flower, try and make it just a little bit uncomfortable, not too much. But if a plant thinks that it might not survive, then it will go into reproductive mode and produce more flowers.
And that's the flowers?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then you just rake it all so that it's nice and smooth and you've got a firm surface, so that when you roll out your turf carpet, all the roots are in contact with the soil because you don't want any air gaps. Or when you sow your seed, again, there's good contact with the soil. And then you must keep it damp for about 2 months. Just keep watering it. If it dries out, then you don't get good establishment.
No.
That's why it's a good idea to sow seed in the autumn or to lay turf in the autumn. Because in the spring, if you get the rain stopping early and it gets dry, then you won't get very good establishment. So you lay it all in the autumn, you get the winter rains, you get the initial root growth, and then it's all there waiting to go when the spring comes next year.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Carolyn, I put a border around of my wildflower turf. One side works really well, and that's back here. But that side over there isn't doing the same thing. And so I think I've got 2 different climates in one little patch here. But how would I go about, and what kind of seeds would I plant to take care of different climates even?
You're quite right. I can see that you've got a different performance on both sides. And in fact, if you look, some flowers are doing better on one side than the other, which does suggest maybe microclimate, or on the side, on this side of the garden where things don't appear to be doing so well, you do have a lot of competition from ivy and other trees and so on, which will be pulling moisture out of the soil. But I think it is really important, the point you raise, that you need to have the right plant in the right place. So if you've got something that's where the conditions are dry and the ground is quite disturbed, you can plant some things like poppies and cornflowers. But you don't try and plant a poppy in the shade. It doesn't grow well. But the shade gives you the opportunity for plants like foxgloves and angelica. So if you've got shade, get shade-loving plants. If you've got a boggy area, find plants that, like primulas, that prefer wet conditions.
Right.
And I think what you'll find over time is that your garden's going to settle down, and that the plants that are happy on that side will flourish and the plants that are happy on that side will flourish. And you can always top up with a bit of seed. If you source from a reputable supplier, they will be able to advise you. In fact, anybody can do a search on the internet. Just go onto the internet and ask a search engine, what wildflowers should I have for dry shade? And then you'll get advice. I think you got your wildflower turf from the company of that name, Wildflower Turf.
Yes,
which is in Reading. Which is in Basingstoke. That's local to Reading. Another good local supplier for seed is Chiltern Seed. So if you want to make sure you've got seeds of local provenance, there are local suppliers. Otherwise, of course, anyone can just walk into a garden centre and buy a packet of wildflower seeds and have a go.
Right. Okay. So Carolyn, I know what motivated me I became very excited about giving my bit back to nature and actually providing something for bees, which I understand are under threat. But why do we want everyone doing this? I mean, I can see why, but why don't you list out the reasons for me?
A lot of people are planting wildflowers at the moment because they're concerned about insect populations. That, of course, is one of the main reasons behind the rewilding project that we've got on in Reading at the moment, where we're allowing these sorts of plants to grow up through the grasses to provide nectar and pollen for insects. And that is a very good reason to have it in your garden, because bee populations, as you say, are under threat. They've reduced substantially, and we do need to provide habitat for wild bees. Right. Another reason is for keen gardeners who have vegetable patches or growing fruit trees, because it brings in the pollinators. So you've got all of these flowers here attracting the insects, and then while they're here, they hover around your fruit trees and your vegetables.
My apples right there.
Yes, and pollinate them for you. In fact, in Caversham Court Gardens in Reading, we did that. We introduced wildflower banks to bring in pollinators in the allotment gardens, so that to help with the fruit and vegetable growth.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and of course the third reason is just that it looks so nice. And this contrast that you've got here between the formal garden and this lovely wild area is just so pretty, which is always another reason to do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
You may find at the end of the season that it just all dies down and is less interesting.
Right.
But don't worry, next spring it'll all come back.
Well, that's one other question, actually. What do I do when this starts dying back? Do I need to mow it down, or?
Yeah, let it all set seed at the end of the season, and make sure that that the seed heads are all properly dry and that they've shaken out their seed, and that before you cut it down. The other thing you can do is cut it down, leave it for a few weeks, let all the seed drop out, and then you must take everything off. Because of course if you don't, you've got compost here, haven't you, which puts nutrients back into the soil. So make sure that you cut it all down to ground level and rake it all off.
Okay.
And then just leave it for the winter as effectively as low.
Right,
cut.
like grass.
Yeah,
yes,
like grass.
Yes.
It'll be a bit rougher, and then it'll all pop back next season.
That's fine. Great, good. Well, I hope we get to the end there, because I can't wait for this to happen again next year. So thanks so much for coming and sharing some tips with me. It's really been a great venture, and I'm just hoping that more people do it.
So do I.
Yeah, yeah.